Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Fairy God Boss live webinar in partnership with Morgan Stanley. We are so thrilled to have you all join us today. And we're going to give folks just a few more minutes to connect before we get started with questions. And while we're waiting, we've seen folks already put in their locations into the chat. It's amazing to see where everyone is coming from, both domestically here in the US and internationally as well. We see a lot of folks out of London. If you haven't already posted where you're based or where you're tuning in from, we'd love to see where you're from. And if you're comfortable, what you're looking forward to out of today's conversation as well. If there's talking points, questions, thoughts that you have, we'd love to get a head start to see what's top of mind for you all today before we begin. But that said, I would love to introduce myself. My name is Morgan Franklin. I'm a senior account manager at the Muse and Fairy God Boss, and I'm based in Austin, Texas. We have folks from Atlanta, Virginia. Hi, Nicole from Virginia, and Janelle from the Bronx. We're just really happy that you're all here today, and I have a few quick announcements before we begin our discussion. First and foremost, this will be a recorded session. So as a registrant, you will have access to this recording once the conversation is over. So if you want to repost, share, revisit this conversation at a later date, you'll be able to do so. And of course, during the conversation, my second announcement is please feel free to be active in the chat. This is a fantastic opportunity for you to ask questions of our panelists, but also to connect with all of the other registrants and attendees today. There are some amazing women who are logging on. I can see you from literally all over the country. It's amazing to see these faces and these names. So feel free to drop your LinkedIn, any contact information to make sure these connections are shared and maintained once this conversation is over. That said, I am thrilled to start today's event titled How to Pivot, Make Career Comebacks, and Advance in Your Career, sponsored by Morgan Stanley. For those of you who are not familiar with Fairy God Boss, though, we are the largest online community for women. Millions of women visit Fairy God Boss every single day for career connections, community advice, job opportunities, hard to reach information about how companies actually treat their women employees, and of course, virtual events just like this one. Today, I am so happy to be joined by three phenomenal representatives from Morgan Stanley: Rachel Lewis, Executive Director of Morgan Stanley Structured Investments; Elizabeth Robinson, Project Manager at Morgan Stanley; and Benita Vora, Vice President of Operations Technology at Morgan Stanley. Before we begin, would each of you please introduce yourselves, take a minute or so to tell us where you're based, tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life, both professionally and personally, and maybe a bit about your role at Morgan Stanley. Benita, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Benita Vora. I was born and brought up in Mumbai, India, where I earned myself a bachelor's degree in engineering, after which I traveled to the US to earn myself a master's degree. I was in Boston, Massachusetts, for over a decade, where essentially I started my professional career. I started a family, had children, had a great career there. And then around 2013, I moved to New York City, which is at the point where I took a sabbatical. And then about 6 years ago, I joined Morgan Stanley through the Return to Work program. So that's a little bit about me. Personally, I love to travel. It's what I think opened up the world for me. I had an opportunity as a child to travel both locally in India as well as internationally, which, I got to meet many different people, got to see different cultures, hear different languages spoken, and it's what made me realize that I want to be a world citizen, and drove me to basically come to the US and make a home here. So that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. We're so happy you're here, Benita.
Thank you.
Rachel, let's go ahead and pop over to you next.
Morning. I started my career in financial services here in New York City at another firm at JP Morgan. Spent 2 years there, met my then boyfriend, who's my now husband. He was on a contract out of Switzerland, so we moved together to Geneva, Switzerland for 8 years in Europe. I was between Geneva and London working for Citi Private Bank, working in equity derivatives for private clients, very much like what I'm doing now. I took a 6-year career break although attempting to come back in March 2020, it turned out to be, I think, an extra 18 months or 2 years that I was at home with my now 2 kids. But very grateful for Morgan Stanley giving me a chance back in the office. Again, same type of work that I was doing before, equity derivatives for private clients in Times Square, one big 15-year circle.
Love the circle. I'm glad that you're here, Rachel. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, round us off.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Robinson. I'm based in the Morgan Stanley London office. Joined Morgan Stanley in 2021 through the Return to Work program. Everything was virtual. So not only coming back from a 3-year career break, you didn't see any friendly faces. We were stuck on Zoom calls for the whole of our induction period. So a bit of the change of being back at work and still in a virtual environment took a lot of getting used to. Prior to London, I lived in Sydney and originally from Singapore. And I'm currently in a projects role managing transformation projects. So anything that's manual within the operations business at Morgan Stanley, we're trying our best to automate or make it less manual and less repetitive for the operations users. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Glad you're here, Elizabeth. And also, Vinita, you mentioned you wanting to be a citizen of the world. I'm looking at the 3 of you right now who've lived all over the world. So I think it speaks so well to your experiences, all 3 of you, each of you, traveling and really leaning into your careers and prioritizing what's important to you. So we're glad you're here and super excited for this conversation. For our attendees who just dialed in, don't worry, you did not miss much. We're just beginning. Thank you again for being here today. Quick reminder to feel free to put comments, questions in the chat. We should have some time before the end of the hour to answer a few audience questions directly from you all. But that said, let's get started with our first question. It's a 2-part question, so feel free to take a second, answer the first and then the second. Where did you start your career journey? We heard a little bit from each of you about sort of where you went to school, your experience in the financial services industry, but sort of where did you begin? What were those previous roles and experiences? And then the second part here is what motivated you or prompted you or required you to make the career change or the pivot to where you are right now. Rachel, you sort of hit on this already, took some time to take care of the kids. So I'd love to start with you. Talk us through that first part of your career journey, what made the pivot happen, what was that impetus, and how have things been so far?
Sure, thank you. Well, I went to university at Georgetown, so I got to spend a semi-analyst year with JP Morgan, and after senior year returned there, always saw myself in the private wealth side of financial services, which is where I began. I think I mentioned the personal tidbit that I met my then boyfriend, now husband, who was on a 3-year contract. So speaking of things you can't plan for but end up impacting your life. A couple of years later, we decided, we both work in private banking. Working in Geneva was a great opportunity for me pre-financial crisis. Stayed in Europe through the financial crisis, which was an experience in and of itself. Being a fish out of water, lots of interesting working hours. And then I was lucky enough to have my first son in London, where you have a pretty generous maternity policy federally and even at the firm that I was at. So I took a year away from the office. And within that time, we decided for personal reasons to move to the United States. My husband is Australian, but wanted to be near family for some help. So it's kind of a natural transition. And between the baby at home and the international move, made sense for me to step away from the office. It turned into 6 years. And luckily, I stayed in touch with former colleagues who recommended the Return to Work program at Morgan Stanley. So when I was ready to come back, everyone says network is important. They are not kidding. They told me about the program, and here I am, correctly placed in the right area to use that skill set that I thought I forgot, but turns out I didn't, and I'm really happy to be back.
Yeah, those skills never leave you, and it's a nice little reminder that you're still capable. And it's great to know the Morgan Stanley Return to Work program allowed you to just lean into those existing skills and rebuild those muscles so quickly. And I hope your little ones are doing great. And they were so lucky to have their mom at home for 6 years. I think that's amazing. Elizabeth, let's pop over to you. What was sort of the start of your career journey and what led to your pivot to Morgan Stanley?
So start of career journey after uni, I went sailing for 2 years representing Singapore. So that was a bit of a break there because obviously all my peers had already started work, and at that point, mum was saying that you can't keep doing this; it's not going to pay the bills. But I was like, you only live once, so did that. Glad I ticked that box, and then joined Credit Suisse in Singapore just before the GFC as an associate, and we were in induction while the crisis was going on, so we came back, got thrown on the floor, and everybody just picked something up, anything up, because no one had the time to sort of sit and train. So that was a bit of a baptism of fire. And I've worked for Westpac Bank in Sydney as well when we moved there. So similar to Rachel, I have an Australian husband. So yeah, and so this move to the UK was due to his work. And so for a while, and probably not the term I like to use, I was just a trailing spouse, which I really don't like the sound of it. And so I decided that, while taking the break for childcare, I still needed something for my own. I didn't want to be Liz the mom. I wanted to be, Liz the person who knows the stuff, knows about FX operations, So I think I wanted to rebrand myself as well. And so the Return to Work program, I think it's great because it allows you to come back. So we all haven't forgotten how to work. You just need a bit of a refresh. And with the guidance that the program gives, it really helps build your confidence from the ground up.
Thanks, Liz. I love that. I wanted to rebrand Liz. I think that's amazing. And I think we're going to revisit that often during this conversation because it lends itself to pivots and career advancements and sort of really defining who you are in the workforce and moving forward with that identity full throttle. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you for sharing that. Vanita, talk to us about your history, your career journey, and how you ended up pivoting here to Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, sure. So my career took a little bit of a different path. I got out of grad school and I started an internship at Staples. So in the retail industry, essentially, started off on retail. So I have a technology background. So started off on retail systems. Was very fortunate. So as a business analyst, was very fortunate to be part of the team that launched the, probably dating myself here, but launched the staples.com website. It was like big boom, big tech bubble. Everyone was talking about e-commerce. We were like among the few companies that were actually getting out there and launching websites. So that was an amazing experience. And basically very early on in my career, I realized that you kind of, Liz touched upon it a little bit as well. You have to kind of rebrand and reinvent yourself. So I kind of started in the QA business analyst space. When I got involved with the, the website projects, the e-commerce side of the house, I pivoted to user experience and usability. It was still fairly new and people were talking about, okay, we're going to have these websites, but how are we going to get people to learn how to use them? Right. So I was able to be part of the team that was studying that. I found some great mentors who were willing to kind of teach me, because a lot of this you can go to school for, but I was just done with grad school and basically didn't have any money. So got them to basically train me, take me under their wing, and got to learn in that space. So I was at Staples for about 8.5, 9 years. And then I decided to go into consulting for myself. So I was like, I want to make my own hours. There were a lot of opportunities in that space. So I did consulting, user experience consulting for a few years. And then the family decided to move to New York. So that's when I moved to New York and took a sabbatical to spend time with my family. My mom, who lived in India, had a health issue. So, not working helped me spend time with her, which was fabulous. And I was very fortunate to have that luxury. So I got to do that. I had 2 children, got to spend a lot of time with them. And then again, in the same theme as reinventing myself, I kind of was done with that. I was like, okay, what next, right? So that's when I decided to come back to work. So the Return to Work program was not my first choice, I'll be very honest, because having been in consulting, I felt like I could just go back and do that, right? How hard can it be? But what I didn't realize was because I was in Boston and I had a huge network, that was very easy for me to find gigs. But now I was in a whole new city, didn't have a network, didn't know where to start. I would go to events and I felt very much like I didn't even know who to start talking with. So I did a few interviews, didn't go well. They went terrible, actually. So then I started to look at other opportunities and found out about returnship programs across. This is 2018, right? So there weren't a lot of places doing it, but Morgan was definitely one of the places, and met the recruiter at an event actually that I went to, and it was great to have that opportunity, right, one-on-one, to speak with somebody. And he took my resume, and then I got a call from them, which worked out rather nicely.
I think it did. I think it did. Thank you for sharing that story, Vanita. And that leads really nicely into my next question. You spoke really well about the journey to finding this return to work program, the process of working with the interviews and the resume, the whole 9 yards, right? That whole procedure. So I'd like to pivot into sort of tactically. Elizabeth and Rachel would love to hear about how you both really approached finding this return to work program. How did you make the switch? What was that process like for you? Was it going to events sort of like Vanita mentioned and sort of hearing through the grapevine about this program? Did you already know of someone who had gone through it before? Would love to kind of hear how you approached making the transition, how you came across the return to work program, and what your journey was like. So Elizabeth, we can start with you. Talk to us a little bit more about tactically how you found yourself at Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, so I found out about this program through a website, or a London, UK-based website called 2 to 3 Days. So essentially, they, as a group, are trying to speak to employers. How do we make it work for people? Like life requirements change. In the UK, it's 13 weeks of school holidays you have to cover. You don't have enough annual leave to take all that time off. So things like that. And, how do you manage work and life around your life schedule, your work schedule? And so it was quite helpful. They had a few similar webinars like that, and they would signpost all prospective programs, when the application for them would be open. So I applied through that. So not only through Morgan Stanley, through a few others from their website as well. And I think preparing, like Vanita said, I think continuously training, updating your CV, obviously, highlighting your transferable skills. So, even with a break, regardless whether for childcare or looking after aging parents, you have skills. You've probably volunteered a lot during that time. Any study that you've done, all these things should be talked about. It shouldn't be just because you weren't physically in an office or had an employer. It doesn't make that, it shouldn't discount any of that when you were on a break. So yeah, I think, and then obviously having a positive mindset, it's really hard. And I think Vanita said as well, getting your confidence back. And when people ask the question about the break, you feel really sheepish and, not wanting to talk about it. So I guess with a return to work program, it's upfront, right? They recognize that you've had a break, so let's just park that. We don't need to address that anymore. So that sort of helps to cross that hurdle, because I think a lot of employers who are not doing a return to work program just look at the gap and just question it, and then you get so hung up about that gap versus talking about all the good work that you've done prior to that gap, during the gap. So I think just remember that, don't discount anything that you've done during your break and before that. It's all still there. So you just need to tap, someone just needs to see that potential in you, and then you go from there.
I think that's phenomenal, and I want to underscore that point. It's not a gap in a way that you lost skills or you lost capabilities. It was a gap in which you gained more skills and more capabilities, and we're constantly learning how to flex new muscles. I've seen a trend for a lot of working mothers or working parents generally who are putting that experience as a caretaker for an elderly parent or for children on their LinkedIns and on their resumes, because it is it's something to be celebrated. It also speaks so much to the work you're continuing to do on yourself. So thank you for saying that, Liz. I think that's really important to hit home, is these are skills to talk about and experiences that show tremendous value for you and will add so much value to the workforce that you join. Rachel, pivoting to you, can you talk to us more about your journey to find the Return to Work program? How did you approach it? How did Morgan Stanley sort of support you during that interview application process?
Sure. I also did want to echo what Elizabeth said. I feel like the biggest obstacle in ending the gap and coming back to office work was myself, and really took for granted all of the things that I was doing at that time at home. And by the way, in my cohort, I started at Morgan Stanley 4 years ago. There was a woman who I'm still close with. She was out 14 years and is now the head of a team of 16 people. So everybody's life takes a different path. And I think stepping away from office work doesn't mean that you don't have something to bring back to the table. I did hear about the program through a colleague of mine at another firm in another country. So, again, keeping connections alive really helped me. I hadn't worked in New York in 12 years. So essentially a new environment, new firm. So I applied cold through the website, but then when my ex-colleague had found out about it, connected me with the right people based on the skill set that I had from what, she knew of my past work experience. And, the rest was history. I think the firm does a really good job. It's a very structured 12-week program. So we have trainings and this cohort of peers that you stay in touch with through in-person onboarding a couple of days, but then throughout the 12 weeks. And, me personally, my team, I work in wealth management, capital markets. They had a series of daily sort of deep dives into various parts of the firm, which as a person new to the business, at this firm, it broke a lot of mental barriers that I had about not knowing the nomenclature, not knowing exactly how things were here. And by the end, I felt prepared enough to be confidently taking the offer to stay on.
That's helpful. Thank you. And yeah, the network is important. I think we'll probably hit on that a little bit more throughout today's conversation, but I want to thank you both for bringing that up, as sort of leaning on the support network you already have developed throughout your career. So many folks become new employees at new companies through referrals, through these opportunities that you're mentioning. So I want to make sure folks know to nurture that network because it is so incredibly important. But pivoting a bit to my next question, which is more about the skills that you acquired in this pivot process, right? So you mentioned, Vinita, sort of articulating your value in interview processes. Whether those interviews went well or not so well is up to debate, but you learned how to really tell your value story in your career journey, despite what folks may interpret as a gap. So I would like to learn more about what skills you built through this experience and how you've benefited from building those skills and how those have transferred into your current role. Because it's such a unique experience that you each went through, taking, short-term breaks and then re-entering the workforce through this program, and you learned a lot. So can you talk to me about the skills that you gained and how those have really directed your career going forward with Morgan Stanley? Vinita, we're going to start with you here.
Yeah, sure. So I think Elizabeth may have said this about like the work that you were doing when you weren't necessarily in an office job, right? So what I found is that a lot of those same skills, basically I can apply in the office. I just needed to have that mind shift, right? Which that return to work program really allowed you. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, right? Where you get the trainings and you get the opportunity to upskill. But the biggest benefit I think you get is with a cohort of people that are coming, which have backgrounds similar to you, whether it's the 4-year break or, as Rachel mentioned, the 14-year break. I think the biggest benefit that I got was being able to find my confidence again, right? And being able to, and I think you mentioned it, to flex that muscle again, which I think I was using it differently, right? So that was one big benefit. I think somewhere along the way when I took my sabbatical, I lost some of that confidence, but then coming back into the professional environment, being able to talk to people about things other than, raising money for the next, I don't know, PTA fundraiser, right? That just helped kind of refocus, reshift. So the upskilling definitely helped. I think another benefit was with in a professional environment, you find mentors, right? You find other, and it could be a man or a woman, but other professionals that you want to model your career on, and you get to learn, leadership skills from them by observing them, by seeing them in action. That is another benefit I think I think when I left work, I was in a different point in my career where I don't think I was looking to be a leader, but when I came back, I came back with a different agenda now, right? Like I've been the individual contributor, I've been that superstar of the team that was able to deliver. Now it's all about mentoring teams, growing teams, right? So I was able to basically pull that, learn on those skills and be able to benefit from that. And I think just generally also the upskilling, right? I mean, again, and I'm in technology, and I'm not saying that this is not true for other areas of work, but you have to always remain current. You have to remain on top of it. And when you're in a professional environment, when you're, working on projects, you just kind of have to keep yourself current, right? There's no slack there. So that's another benefit. It really constantly challenges you and keeps you on your toes.
That's great. And thank you for calling attention to sort of the continued skill building, because it does take initiative. Not everyone is going to take, a sabbatical or short-term break and continue to invest in themselves in certifications or additional ad hoc opportunities. But it seems like you really took initiative and put the pedal to the metal to ensure you were staying up to date with what was happening trend-wise in your industry, which I think is also a key factor for why you were such an amazing candidate for the program. Elizabeth, how about you? Talk to me a little bit more about the skills that you found yourself building during this process and this transition period for you, and those experiences more broadly, and how they've informed sort of how you show up today at the workplace.
I think relocating countries, which Vinita and Rachel have done as well, I think that's ultimate project management skill set, really, like building everything from the ground up. Finding new dentist, new doctor, new hairdresser, like that alone, making new friends. So actually, you don't even realize it, but you have to be quite methodical about doing things like that. Moving to the UK, we had no family here. It was, to build trust, to put your game face on and suss out all these other parents in the playground and whether we're gonna get along, and build some kind of network. So for me, I mean, I see that, not obviously with hindsight, I see that now as a transferable skill. I mean, I had to do it at that time. It's pretty much survival for us to to start meeting other families in the area. But yeah, and it's the same, coming back into the office, it's really daunting as well. And for me, it was virtual, 100% virtual. So there was no coffee side chat. So it was, it was daunting in the sense that you've only met these people on Zoom. You didn't have the luxury of just popping your head around the corner and say, can you help me look at this? So you had to make that, even more effort. So being back in the office now for like things like collaboration and, team building activities, I appreciate it so much more, having that sort of being part of that COVID intake. So I think, again, don't downplay anything that you've done during the gap. Like, look at that and think, what there are things you would have done that would have pushed you completely out of your comfort zone, which would happen in the office as well. You will get opportunities that you can't say no to, which might have happened during your break. So think of things like that, and all that becomes very applicable, whether it's through this return to work program or through any job that you're interviewing for. Just have the confidence to, I think, highlight things that might not seem like work skills, and try and frame it in a way that that will look attractive to prospective employers.
Yeah, I think that's great. And thank you. The international moves. Yes, project manager excellence. I think all three of you have demonstrated that tenfold. So kudos to you for executing it and reminding people that that is a huge skill that not everyone has built over the years. So I appreciate that, Liz. Rachel, before we move on to the next question, anything you want to add here in terms of skills that you develop, or you want to call out to the audience that just reminders for them, like if you've probably built this skill and be proud of it as well? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot was already said that I would say. So as usual, I love to hear from my peers, and you feel like you have like-minded people out there. I guess two things I would say. One is I applied to 18 jobs before I ended up at this one. So it feels, when you take the break, which is something a lot of people do for a lot of different valid reasons, it should be easier to come back. It wasn't for some time. So the upskilling, the staying involved in local organizations, developing whatever it was that made, filled the professional feedback gap that I had, I found really useful. But on the flip side, the gap from office work also, I think, made me empathize a lot with a lot of different types of employees. So since I've come back here, and Vinita, covered it a little bit, whereas before, if I was a deliverer of project work on the desk. Now I almost feel a sense of responsibility to pull up those who had a different path like I did. I think there's a lot of value that comes from time spent doing any number of things that are outside of, the same four walls. So definitely made me more inclusive, I think, and try to spread that message. So there's all kinds of skills that a firm needs that you'd be bringing back with you.
That's great. And I wanted to hit on something else that we talked about prior to this chat, which is this program at Morgan Stanley is in its 10th year. So fully realized, it really speaks to sort of the investment the company has made in this program. It's international. You all represent so many different locations and configurations of what work and work life looks like, and have come to the program from so many different pathways. So I just wanted to hit that home as well, to your point, Rachel, about looking at people who have different career paths and seeing the skills, seeing the experiences and the value they bring to the organization, just as Morgan Stanley has done with the three of you. So wanted to call that out before we move on as well. So looking at the return to work program and then sort of taking it a step further up, extrapolating and looking at Morgan Stanley more broadly, I would love to hear more about how you think Morgan Stanley has shown up for you as a great place for work, both as a return to worker, but also, as a working mom, as someone with career ambition, all these different identities that each of you have. How has Morgan Stanley really empowered you to be a meaningful contributor to the workplace, be it through the benefits they offer, the initiatives, unique opportunities that you've taken advantage of? I'd love for you to just kind of speak broadly to why this is such a valuable environment that you've really been able to grow in. And Vanita, I'd like to start with you for this question.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things that comes top of mind, and is the culture, right? The culture and the people here, and also just generally people's. And again, there's a huge company, many geographies, very diverse. So there's obviously microcosms that exist, but in general, like there's a culture of innovation, and I think it applies across the board, right? Whether it's, like we said, the Return to Work program, which is 10 years old, whether it's with the products and services we offer, whether it's with the technology we're trying to adopt. So overall, I think just having that kind of culture just lends itself very well to people, again, right? Like us, who want to pivot, who want to reinvent themselves, that, want, maybe this is our second or even third calling in life. And it kind of sets itself really well from a culture perspective. And then also I would say that there's being such a large firm, there's also always opportunity, right? There's so many programs we have. Like I'm in my 6th year now at Morgan. I've had I would say 3 different jobs in these 6 years. I've been able to climb the corporate ladder while I was at it. I've been able to, engage with some wonderful people who've taught me things, people who I've been able to teach things to. So it's been very fulfilling in that way, because again, coming back, from the sabbatical or the break, a lot of us may have started engaging in other things. We talked about, potentially volunteering. Yeah, you might have done that. There's a great program here called GVM, Global Volunteering Month, where we all take out time as a group or as a team. We'll go and do an activity. It helps with team building. It helps you give back to the community, things like that. So it's not like, you lose out on the things that may have made you leave the workspace, when you started, right? So it helps you kind of be a more well-rounded person here. And I really appreciate that.
That's great. And thank you for hitting at the Global Volunteer Month. I think that is so unique to Morgan Stanley, but to your point, speaks to the culture, the values, and the opportunities that employees are given. Rachel, how about you? What has been your experience sort of with Morgan Stanley broadly, and how it's really allowed you to show up as an employee?
Sure. Well, perfect segue, because I was going to talk about the pillars of the institution. So we have 5 pillars. One is giving back. So like Vanita mentioned, lots of opportunity to keep your interests alive. And the other that was added during the 4 years that I was here is diversity and inclusion. They also added a board seat reflecting the same. So I feel like when you hear, the program's in its 10th year, the desire is to place as many people into full-time jobs, after going through the program as possible, that they have someone sitting on the board of directors representing like the importance of diversity and inclusion to the firm. It is sort of putting their money where their mouth is, as far as, embracing people that bring something different to the table. All the way down to, me within my team, my manager treats this, he said, it's not extracurricular. This is part of what you are paid to do. Kind of also to your point about the volunteering, but it is prevalent in everything that we do here. So it makes me feel less fish out of water than I probably feared before coming here. And I think it's worth saying too, the Return to Work program specifically, 10 years is such an achievement. It's not just for people who left for family leave reasons either. There were people in my cohort who did, volunteer work or something philanthropic. They started a business that, spun into something else and just looked to come back. So I think there's lots of different ways that people could get here, but I'm, grateful for it. And I think the firm, it's much better than I even could have expected.
Love that. And yes, so many diverse backgrounds. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but thank you for underscoring, people came from way different approaches in life, different times off, lengths for time off, I should say. And I love the fact that there's these pillars that are really embodied by not just folks at the bottom, people who are in the day in, day out doing the work, but also folks at the top. It's entirely throughout the entire organization, which is beautiful to see. Elizabeth, I want to hit on you as well and hear about your experience with sort of the greater culture at Morgan Stanley. And specifically, could you talk a little bit about work-life balance and flexibility, particularly through this Return to Work program, but also kind of culturally how you've been able to really take advantage of those opportunities at the firm?
Yeah, so obviously echoing what Vanita and Rachel said about the culture, and you will also realize I'm sure when we all first join, when you join calls and you realize the longevity of a lot of people on these calls, it just goes to show that, people really love being at work, as ironic as it sounds, and they're constantly challenged, and that they haven't had to leave the firm to get to be challenged because they've just been presented with opportunity. So it's what you make of it. If you're up for the challenge, there's always a new, bigger, better role waiting for you. And so just to echo the diversity and inclusion piece as well, I'm part of an employee network group called Net East Asia. And so along with the Return to Work sort of alumni and group that you have with a lot of similar shared experiences, Morgan Stanley has employee network groups, which are, again, run by staff members who volunteer to be part of these networks and to drive conversations or things that matter to them as as a network. So we have the Pride Network, and this is all over globally in all our offices. So again, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk as well through all these initiatives, and we measure ourselves. There is what does success look like. We don't just sit around and talk about our our employee networks. We actually go out and action these items. So back to work-life balance and flexibility, I think a lot of that is just being open with your managers. You work hard and play hard. So there are times where the business just requires those long hours and you just have to put in. It's just, and it's not forever, and everybody understands that. So it might be for a period of time. And when you get the quiet days, just take the time back. I think that is never a question. No one watches the clock and make sure you clock in at 9 every day. And so there has to be that flexibility, and it has to be earned as well. Knowing that when when there's a deadline or there's something that needs to be delivered, you'll step up, and then taking that time when it's quieter. So I think that's how you need to make flexibility work. Building that trust with your manager, your team.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think that's helpful. Thank you, Liz. And
can I just add a point? Something
please.
That Elizabeth said that jogged my memory a little bit. I think, and this is kind of going back to the when you kind of take that break and you're trying to come back, right? I think I think one of the reasons I left work was because I couldn't find work-life balance. That was like the core for me, right? I was like, I decided to start a family. I had one young child. I was, second one was on the way, and I was like, I can do it all, right? But I couldn't, and I just didn't know how to find that balance. And the one thing when I came back to work that a very close friend of mine told me, who's very successful in her career and single mom of two, very, very successful. She's like, there is nothing called work-life balance. It's all about work-life integration. And if you can find that, and I think that it made what Elizabeth said made me think about it, where sometimes work's going to need you more, sometimes your personal life's going to need you more. That's the balance you have to find. Who needs you more at that point in time? It's not trying to do it all in the same day. And I think if you can keep that top of mind, maybe a little bit, a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I think. little bit easier or less disappointing when you're trying to navigate this process.
I love that you added that. And like also giving yourself grace. We're not superhuman. We are just human. And though we can do superhuman things from time to time, at the end of the day, you have to prioritize yourself, your well-being, the well-being of your family and friends. And it's lovely to hear that Morgan Stanley empowers you all to do that through the initiatives that you've mentioned, through the pillars, through the culture, through the managers that you've had and mentors that you've had. We haven't talked too much about them, but I can hear in the anecdotes you're sharing, there clearly is a culture of people investing in you and allowing you to show up as yourself, take the breaks when you need it, but push yourself when you were required to. And I think that's a really empowering culture to be a part of. I want to pivot to a few audience questions, and I'll summarize them as best I can to make sure we're getting at the meat and potatoes of what folks are asking. But a lot of questions around tips regarding navigating the application process, the interview process after time off work. You each mentioned this in your own way, but I'd like to sort of revisit that for the time being. What were your experiences in the interview and application process? And do you have any tips to make this feel a little less daunting for folks who are re-entering the workforce again? Rachel, I'm going to jump over to you. I see you nodding.
I know,
you
I'm
have
excited.
something to say.
I feel like it's because it's the thing that I was most apprehensive about, partly maybe made worse by the 18 applications I mentioned that were unsuccessful. But I needed to repackage myself, rebrand myself, which Liz touched on too, and embrace what I did for the 12 prior years before taking the break, and B, what continued or developed further in the skills since taking an office break. I was promoted to executive director the year after I joined here. So here, I was worried that I would forget everything that I ever knew about Bloomberg or, whatever it may be. And my manager and his manager explicitly said, this is because of all the work you put into up to that point. Like, it didn't fall out of your head, and you had a break and picked up some different skills, but you earned that title. And they both also always say to stop leading with the gap, which I think was addressed before too. So the sooner that you can kind of, build the mental confidence, whatever took you out of the office is probably a normal, change in course in a lot of people's lives. I think it made me more empathetic, more, like I said, probably more aware of the need for inclusion. And I did practice a bit when I started the interview process here. So asking people who were, in financial services and had a sense of how things were pre-COVID. So flexibility has only gotten better really since then, and the way the technology has improved that. But dusting off the CV and going through some questions and learning how to frame that 6 years like it wasn't this, waste of anybody's time, really. I think that I'm the best time manager now, having 2 little kids at home and an hour and a half commute every day each way, that it all works out. Definitely integration, probably over balance, but don't underscore what you're doing, with this time.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm thanking you on behalf of the audience, because what you were saying, I think, really resonated with a lot of people tuning in. And you mentioned the support of managers, mentors. Again, this network is going to be really important, it seems, for folks who are at this pivotal stage of transitioning back to work or, leaving to try a different field altogether. Liz, do you want to add anything in terms of tips, tricks, advice that you have for people who are doing what you did just a few years ago? What was something that you know now that you wish you knew then?
So whatever Rachel said, and also during the interview, it's not a one-way street. You should be asking them questions as well. So everything you're putting in the comments you're unsure of, and the interviewers were really open. I thought I did horrible. It was over Zoom. I was so nervous. And what I did was wrote a thank you letter summarizing what I felt I couldn't get across. So obviously I had my notes and everything I wanted to say, and I probably did say it, but you sort of blank out. You have a bit of PTSD during the interview, and so I followed up with a thank you for seeing me today. Here is everything that I wanted to think, to say that again, these are my relevant skills for the job that you were discussing. And so just reiterating whatever may or may not have come across during the interview, and just making sure that they were aware. So almost like your hit list of things again that you wanted to amplify to them, and what makes you the perfect candidate. So that was the little bit extra I followed up after the interview, and just send it to the person that I've been in contact with. And again, not just for this job, any job that you do, it's just a nice sort of follow up, after the fact, when you can sit and compose yourself, just go over, after having more insight on the job at hand, go over what exactly do you think they need, and just summarize where all your strengths are and how it would be a really good fit if they hired you. So that was the little extra I did.
I love that. Vanita, what about you? What was the little extra you did, or tips that you have for folks? I think your experience is also interesting because you did not necessarily come directly from the financial services industry. So knowing that with your background, how did you really articulate the value you would bring to the company, given your consulting background, the background in the retail space, to make that pivot to financial services?
Yeah, sure. So I think, so I'll take the first part first, right? So I think Rachel touched on this, but if I could just add, I think networking, using your professional network is great, but I would say tap that personal network as well, right? Like you're a peer group, right? You have your friends, you have your personal relations, all of them in the workforce have also gotten to certain points while maybe you were taking a sabbatical. So plug into that personal network as well. And call in every favor you can, right? At some point, you've done something for someone, like maybe you babysat someone's kid, or maybe you took someone's kid out on a play date. Like, use that as an opportunity to reconnect with them, and use the network, because that's how you're going to get your next gig. And I think Rachel also mentioned having had 18 maybe unsuccessful, if I remember the number right. I beat you on that, probably triple that number. Just I couldn't get that break, but you have to persevere, right? You have to think of it as there's half the battle's won when you start on the journey. After that point, it can only get better. So just kind of keep at it, and your patience will pay off. Those are kind of the pieces of advice. And sorry, I forgot the second part of your question. If you
curious about you moving from the retail to the financial services, if you were able to sort of speak to how you really articulated how those skills were transferable across industry.
Right. So I think in that, I looked for opportunities, or basically, again, I packaged, as we talked about rebranding, right? I packaged myself as being the outsider, right? So I came into the space and looked for opportunities where I tried to show that I had the soft skills, and I upplayed those, as opposed to necessarily, I may not know financial services, but I know technology, or I know how users interact with the system, and that's what you need to make your product successful, right? So I basically really played up on those. I also think, again, in the space that I am in, technology, it's more about keeping yourself up to date with the newest technology more than the industry, right? Because you will have your business partners who will bring that expertise. So maybe in that, it may be unique, but I think in general, right, part of our DNI, and we spoke about that, right? Diversity and inclusion is to have different opinions and to have different thought processes in the room. So it's really being able to, again, showcase that I may not be from your industry, but I think this way, or if you're given like a use case that you have to respond to, maybe show your creative thinking. And I think that could make you stand out as a candidate.
Yeah, and having faith that you are qualified to be in the room and to fill this role.
That's the part of the battle I think we all have to win, right?
Yes.
Like that, bringing that confidence. I know maybe we'll touch on this later, but just as women, we're not good at that. We're just not good at that. So it's owning it, just taking it, owning it, and owning it, the right person for the job.
Yes, and that pivots perfectly to my next question, which is a traditional question at Fairy Godboss, where we ask all of our panelists the following question, which is exactly what you touched on, right? We've observed, and research shows, that women typically don't feel very comfortable bragging or taking ownership about the amazing things that they've achieved in their personal or professional careers. So I want to force you all in this moment to think about a particular accomplishment. It can be personal, it can be professional, but one that you're really proud of and that you are open and comfortable sharing with the group, to sort of circumvent that stereotype that we're not good at bragging about ourselves and patting ourselves on the back for the good things that we've done. Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. If you're ready to go, what is an accomplishment that you are extraordinarily proud of? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so this is a while ago now. After uni, during uni, I got identified our talent ID to into a sailing program. You can't help, but for Asian, I'm quite tall, so I'm 1.75 meters, which is, I guess, a bit taller than the general population. And so I got talent ID just by my physical attribute to be a crew on 470. So it's two person in a dinghy, and it's an Olympic class boat. So got talent ID to do that. Started training fast track one-on-one with a ex national sailor from Singapore for 6 months, and then got the call up to go to my first international competition. So that was June 2006, and come December 2006 in Doha in Qatar, I won a silver medal at the Asian Games for Singapore. And then in 2007, a gold medal at the Southeast Asian Games. So feels a lifetime ago now. But yeah, I don't think I stopped smiling that day. So.
And I'm not going to stop smiling now. That's an amazing feat. Congratulations. And I love that it sounded like you didn't have experience previously sailing and worked your butt off to fit the bill and to win. So I think that's a credit to your dedication and work ethic. So thank you for sharing that accomplishment.
Yeah, I think it was more a case of I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. Ignorance is bliss at that point. I think just anything that would have prevented me from actually going to do real work. I think that was the motto at that point. So.
Hey, it worked out for you because look where you are. It all came together at the end of the day, which is amazing.
Great.
Rachel, what about you? What's an accomplishment that you're extremely proud of that you want to share today?
Mine is going to sound a lot more generic. That is a very cool story. But I actually wrote that I think it's both the returning to the office, which at the time felt like a very daunting task, and my first move overseas. Similarly put me in an unfamiliar situation. I'm an extroverted person, but moving to a foreign country where I didn't speak the language, new firm at almost the start of the financial crisis. It was so intimidating. I used to take a taxi home from work late at night and ask to be dropped off on a different street that I could pronounce properly in French because I was so embarrassed when it wasn't understood. So I think overcoming not only that, I mean, that to me sounds ridiculous now, but, ended up staying 8 years. It was life-changing for me. And I think the same even about coming back here, had recurring dreams about what I would forget. How would I meet people? I mean, now I used to say I'm an overgrown intern, and that's not true at all. And I now can't imagine having doubted if I should do it. And I'm proud of both. I think the acknowledgement of my adaptability and resilience in some of these, unforeseen circumstances is probably one of my greatest strengths now, if I give myself credit.
Absolutely. I give yourself credit because you deserve it. Absolutely. Everything you've articulated today speaks to your ability to be adaptable and innovative and sort of go with the flow and take big risks and come out on top, which is really, really profound.
Thanks.
Benita, what about you? What's an accomplishment you're excited to share today?
Actually, I'm gonna keep it professional here, but mine is essentially we've been on a cloud journey. So where from a technology perspective, we've been moving more towards cloud-based products. And we, after 18 long months, and again, a globally diverse team, I think we're at 60 some people now. We were able to launch the product earlier this year, and we've been steadily increasing adoption. So I'm really proud of that. 6 years ago, if you asked me if I'd be doing this, I'd be like, no way. But we're there now. So
isn't it amazing how we surprise ourselves?
But it's interesting. Like I forget now that that's how I came back in, right? I feel like I fully assimilated, and it's been a wild ride, but one I've enjoyed.
Good. And you each hit on this in a different way, but the ability to be willing to fail is something that I think was subtly communicated in a lot of your answers, knowing it might not work out, but then again, it might. And I'm still going to take the risk, and I'm still going to put myself out there and try something new and be bold. And I think that's really important because oftentimes we convince ourselves of the negative outcomes instead of focusing on what is possible, what positive outcomes might come from this new journey or new experience or new move to Sydney, Australia. And typically it's good things. Most of the time it's good things, as you all represented today. So just want to call that out and thank you for being bold and being willing to share all of your experience today. Before we wrap, we're going to do a very quick lightning round of one final question, which is, what advice would you give your younger self? And younger is abstract, so it can be yourself 5 years ago, yourself 20 years ago, yourself 2 minutes ago. Your younger self, what's some advice that you would give to her? And Rachel, we'll start with you for this one, then we'll popcorn to Benita and then Liz to wrap us up.
Sure. Just like you said, I would say carpe diem, something my dad always says to us. And you're right, you can always go back and do what you were doing, but take the chance. And working on focusing on the likely scenario and, maybe planning for the worst, and becoming a leader versus a deliverer is something where I think that becomes important. But yeah, just do it, take the chance, and it will turn out probably better than you fear if you're like me.
Love it. Benita, what about you?
Yeah, I think along the same lines. I think life's all about choices, right? So it's either someone's going to make them for you or you have to make them for yourself. So you better get in there and make those choices. But in order to do that, I think you have to know what your non-negotiables are. Like, what's the stuff you're willing to give up on, and then what's the stuff you want, because you can't sweat the small stuff. You can't fight for every little thing, right? So kind of keep your eyes on the prize, and you have a choice. Maybe you don't want that prize. Maybe the prize you want changes, right? But it is up to you. It's your choice at the end of the day. No one should make it for you.
Thank you. Liz.
Okay, I'm gonna do like cliche sports analogy. So it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. With everything in life, your career, your family life, and yes, you have goals and you have, I guess, timelines attached to that goals. And it's good to have those so that you're not just working on something forever and ever. But if it doesn't happen for you this year, it will still happen. It's sort of don't time base everything. You still need to, just regroup, think why it didn't happen, and then go from there with any setback, any difficulty. Have a medal winning plan, or have a plan, what does success look like, and so always just look at the end goal and then just enjoy the journey while you get there, or the marathon, so not the sprint.
That's great. We love that you gave us a sports analogy. Because you've won a gold medal, so of course you did. Amazing. We are almost at time, and I just want to really emphasize how grateful I am for each of you showing up today. The three of you have been phenomenal, and I think our audience is walking away with a lot of amazing feedback, thoughts, tidbits, tips for success. And that's, credit to your stories and your willingness to be vulnerable today and your experiences. So thank you, first and foremost, to the three of you, Rachel, Benita, and Liz. So appreciative of your time. And I also want to thank the audience for tuning in today and being so active in the chat. I don't know if the three of you were able to take a peek, but people were loving this conversation. So thank you to the attendees. Please feel free to connect with our panelists, with other folks from Morgan Stanley. You're obviously able to check out their open roles on the Fairy Godboss site, and certainly learn more about their Return to Work program as well on their career site and on our page on Fairy Godboss. Feel free to connect with one another, stay in touch with folks here. As we mentioned, your network is important, and there are some phenomenal people tuning in today. So reach out to them, say hello. And as a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of today's session. If you want to revisit anything that was said today, you will be able to do so. Look out for that recording coming to your inbox. But for now, we just love your feedback. My teammate Daniela is going to type in a survey link for you all. Feel free to leave some feedback about how the session went, thoughts, recommendations, concerns that you have for us. We'd love to make sure these are relevant to you all. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to Morgan Stanley for this conversation. Thank you again to Benita, Rachel, and Liz. And everyone have a phenomenal rest of your week. Springtime is upon us, so go enjoy the sunshine and the merry weather, and take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.